Maytag month has got it going on. It's all you want with the savings all month long. Baby, can't you see? Maytag month is all you need. You know you can't go wrong when Maytag month is going on.
Save on award-winning performance on all Maytag major appliances during May is Maytag month. Happening now through May 31st.
Shop incredible savings on Maytag at NFM.
Maytag month is going on.
Looking for a new show to dive into? Well, go to Hulu and see what's new, because Hulu has new stuff all the time. Like the full season of FX's epic limited series Shogun, FX's new international spy thriller The Veil, starring Emmy and Golden Globe winner Elizabeth Moss. And don't miss the all-new crime series Under the Bridge, inspired by shocking true events and starring Riley Keough and Lily Gladstone. It's all new, and it's streaming now on Hulu.
For exclusive podcasts and more, sign up at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And on this episode, police in Austin race the clock to solve a string of mail bombings. How did they find the perpetrator? We'll review this season of Witnessed, 19 Days. Joining me to get that done and more is true crime author, TV journalist, and host of the These Are Their Stories podcast, my husband and love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca. That's me.
Nice to see you, Kevin.
Nice to be seen. Nice to have you back.
Also with us is private investigator, certified pet detective, resident cat lady, and author of The Final Curtain, Laura Bricker. Hi, Laura.
Hey, Rebecca, guess what?
What?
It's almost time for lassoing a real cow in 2024 to add to my resume. So stay tuned.
Not just Kevin, but a real cow?
Not just Kevin, but a real cow. It's coming up soon.
That's a story we're going to have to, that just out of context, it seems weird.
Okay, we should talk about it briefly in the after show then. And finally, our captain of all things cynical, author of the City Trilogy of novels, host of Strange Arrivals, and our Patreon Deep Dive Book Club podcast host, Toby Ball. Hello, Toby.
Hello, Rebecca.
Okay, so Kevin.
Yeah.
Coming off our blistering hot review of Ripley, this is obviously Monday's show, right?
Yes.
That was Thursday's show. This is Monday's show. What's coming up on next Thursday's show?
Later this week on Thursday, we're going to be talking about the Netflix hit series Baby Reindeer.
Yes, I can't wait for that conversation. It's going to be an interesting one, don't you think?
I think so, and we haven't had it yet, but I think so.
I think so, too. All right, so Kevin, why don't we just get into it this episode? What do you think? No chit-chat. Be efficient.
If efficiency is something that you're looking for, Rebecca.
Rarely.
And if you think that maybe controlling the amount of talk is something you want to start.
Oh, you'd be appreciative of that?
It's like...
I'll try to stay on track. I'll try not to go off on any squirrel chases.
Guys, this is episode 510 or something like that. We are not changing our ways.
Yeah, I'm living with an umpire. I'm just trying to follow the rules. What can I say?
Oh!
Doing my best to not have this devolve into banana ball.
You're gone! All right.
All right, well, let's get to it. Leading off.
Okay, tell me exactly what happened. My next door neighbor's down with his face down in blood everywhere. I heard the explosion. There's a smoke alarm. There's blood everywhere. Okay, so there was an explosion then? I think so.
Police in Austin, Texas had no clue as to who was behind a package bomb that killed a homeowner in March 2018. 10 days later, when 2 more devices exploded in the city, investigators knew they were dealing with a serial bomber.
What Rob and Jeff discovered inside the house confirmed what most on the scene already feared, that the bombs were almost definitely connected, most likely built by the same person, meaning a serial bomber was on the loose.
With each new attack, the devices were more sophisticated, but authorities caught a break when bombs found at a FedEx facility could be traced to a suspicious man who dropped them off.
He's like, well, when he left, he was so weird. I kind of followed him and I was watching out the window. I saw him get into a red truck. We're like, yeah, that's important. We would really like to talk about that.
In the newest installment of the series from Campside Media, Pegalo Pictures, and Sony Music Entertainment, Witnessed 19 Days recounts the hunt for the Austin serial bomber. Host Sean Flynn, no relation to Kevin, describes the shoe leather efforts of law enforcement to stop the attacks and discern the motive behind the terror campaign. Spoiler alert, we are going to be talking about plot points from Witnessed 19 Days. So if you want to remain spoiler-free, go to the estimated time code in our show notes for our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews. So Laura, I think this is about as straightforward a true crime podcast as we can get, right?
Yeah, right off the bat, I'm like, this is straightforward. We've got the appropriate investigators. It's in a no-frills way. We've got a little bit of background noise here and there, but they just get right into it. And for me and my distractibility when I'm listening to something that's going all over the place, that made this podcast really easy to follow. It's just very no-nonsense journalism. Packaging statistics. How many packages are sent in the U.S. every year? And then we get into the setting.
How many of them go to Rebecca? Because a lot of them do. Rebecca was gone for a week and the packages still kept coming.
Yeah. Listen, I sold some stuff on eBay and bought some stuff on eBay, and unfortunately it all arrived when I was gone.
Sorry, Laura, but...
That's okay. No, so, the packages are going to Rebecca. The packages are going to Austin. We get quick background on the first victim, Anthony, who he is, where he's at in life, what his regular routine is, and then right off with the first bomb. So I think it definitely isn't something that's told in like a super creative storytelling format, but all the information is there.
Yeah, what do you think about this, Toby? Because I was listening to this podcast, and in many ways, it felt like a documentary TV show. Like I found myself wondering, like, are they just filming the series that's going to be made of this at the same time they're making the podcast? Because I felt like I was almost listening to like the TikTok documentary that we may ultimately be reviewing about this story, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Yeah, and I agree. I didn't think about it in quite those terms. But it is different than most podcasts, I guess, we listen to, in that it just really is. It's a police procedural with a couple of digressions when they have particularly interesting people who can talk about, a victim, or like the last one that we listened to, the perpetrator. But I think part of it is that sort of the premise they have, or the story they have, has got so much sort of built-in suspense and stuff that they don't need to kind of create by doing anything else. Because you got the bombing angle, which is so unusual, but it also, because it's a serial bomber, you have that same sort of clock ticking thing that you get in all the stupid serial killer novels and stuff. It's like, we got to stop before he kills again, which in this case, that's actually the deal. Like, we need to stop him before he bombs again. And this I don't think was used as much as it could have been, but the idea that you've got all these people coming into Austin while this is going on, particularly with South by Southwest, but other events as well, that just kind of heightens it too. So it feels as though they've done very well reported, but sort of the least sort of creative way of going about addressing this story that's got these sort of built-in things that make it compelling.
Toby, it's like kind of like Jaws, right? Where it's like, here comes the summer tourist season, like surrounding... You've seen Jaws though, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Oh,
my God, Toby.
Amazing.
That's in my sweet spot.
But it's the same thing. Close the beach. Can't close the beach. It's South by Southwest.
Yeah. You can't close it. It's not one thing. You can't close it, apparently, right?
No, you can't close it. See, I think this podcast, it's fine. It's it's a straightforward, here are the cops, here's what they're doing story. Procedural, I think that's a good way of putting it. So for what it is, it's a solid job. There aren't a lot of different points of view. We've got a reporter. We've got, I think, one family member.
There's more later, but yes.
Basically, if you pitched a podcast and said, hey, we'll do something about the investigation into a serial bomber, this is exactly what would come out of the podcast UNIVAC 5000. So in a great world of true crime, it's somewhat rudimentary, but like I say, for what it is, it's a solid story told.
Yeah, I think something you mentioned, Toby, was just sort of like the dimensions of what's happening in Austin at the time. One of the things I thought about, and of course, we always say you can't review what wasn't there, but I always think of like angles with which this could have been made in a slightly more suspenseful, compelling way. People who make podcasts do have access to things like South by Southwest. I think it could have been cool to give us some atmosphere of the festival itself and give us sort of a sense of what it would be like as an attendee of the festival, or just sort of some sound from the festival to sort of understand really the chaos of it. Because, I know people who have gone, I've never been, but I do know that it's not a contained event, even like the Olympics, which takes place like in a park, right? It's like, it is an event that actually takes over the entire city. And it gets alluded to a little bit in one of the later episodes. I did listen to the whole series, by the way, because I have the binge. And it gets alluded to that it's like every restaurant, every bar, all these small venues across the city. It's not like the police and the bomb squad and the Bearcats can like surround an area. It's not a conference center. It's the whole city. And when you have a bomber who is seemingly targeting random places, and bombs could be anywhere, that does add an interesting dimension of suspense. Like, imagine if you were, attending a talk by some podcast panel over here, and it could happen there. Imagine, I did see that as an interesting dimension, especially since the attendees to Southwest are, quote, the cultural elites of our country. I mean, those are the kind of people I think that would be particularly freaked out by this kind of thing, as we hear in the podcast as well. Definitely it lands different when a certain population is threatened. It doesn't get the same kind of coverage or fear necessarily when it's marginalized communities or places where you perceive that more crime is happening. So that's an angle that I thought of as well.
Do they get to that at all?
Not really, no.
Like, I just kind of felt like that wasn't like exploited at all. Like, I was kind of like, was the mayor like freaking out? And like, was there any like additional pressure being put on them? Or how did that all kind of play out? Like, it just seemed like that would have been like, if you think about creating suspense by just like piling on the complications.
Right.
Like, that seemed like another complication that must have been there. Like, there's just no way that couldn't have been there. So why not kind of explore that a little bit? And maybe there's a reason, but that was, again, it was something I thought was maybe missing.
It was just touched on by as a police difficulty because the final bombing was this trip bomb in the middle of the street. And it was just, how do you police that when people are all over the city? That was the only thing we heard. We didn't hear any sound from sort of like what it would have been like potentially as an attendee or as an organizer. So Laura, one of the things that was interesting is we did hear from some like bomb squad guys, some guys who actually wear those big suits with the fans inside and who, get to go into the scenes. I mean, I really liked those scenes in the podcast. What did you think of those?
Yeah, I think that having the perspective of that bomb guy who had also been in the military was a really good voice to include. That was Josh, and he was the technician at the Austin Bomb Squad. And he was talking about having gone on deployments. He had been a Navy SEAL in Iraq and Afghanistan. And you listen to him getting to the scene. For me, that's when I was like you were saying, Rebecca, like imagining this happening, going off anywhere at South by Southwest. And he's talking about being cautious and deliberate and looking for secondary devices and how this is like we're back in a war zone. And that really sort of brought home that level of like just fear and also just not knowing where this was going to happen next, right? And that this was so out of the ordinary for this area. You also have the guy who's in charge, who's like been there for like 17 years. And this is the first time they've had a situation where someone has been killed by a bomb. And they're all like, yep, this is the real deal. So I think having the perspective from the people that were actually trained in explosives and what they were thinking as they were going out really kind of, for me, was like, okay, shit's getting real here. And even the people that are dealing with it are like, shit's getting real here. And this is not something that you expect to see in Austin, Texas.
About 85 pounds all over your body, head to toe. The center plate is hard Kevlar. And of course, the helmet is hard Kevlar. Now, there's no air conditioning. It has a fan that blows air in the helmet, but that's only so your heavy breathing doesn't fog up the visor.
One time I put on the suit with the top and the fan in the back.
You did?
Yeah. It wasn't a bomb safety suit. I was dressed as McGruff, the crime dog, for the Memorial Day parade.
What?
Yeah, when I was with Manchester Crime Line as a volunteer there. So, yeah, you need the fan because it will fog up, and you don't want that.
No.
But I'll tell you, when you're McGruff, though, you're not thinking about the only thing that you're going to lose are your hands.
Right.
Right? Everything else is going to be fine. You're going to blow off your hands and feet.
Yeah.
But you'll survive.
Right.
You weren't thinking of that about McGruff. So that's...
Not the same? Are you saying it's not the same?
I'm going to say it's not the same. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe if the guy's in the hurt locker and I want to actually like start
Talk
comparing
about
notes.
it. Yeah.
Maybe we'll, find some common ground there, but I just, the fan in the back was definitely a reminder.
I mean, to be clear, you're not comparing your experience with these bomb squad guys, to be clear.
I think I did. So.
I mean,
cows left the barn. Rebecca.
I mean, Kevin, you have to admit, the one thing that is the prospect is frightening of this series of crimes is that each of these bombs was different, right? It's like we heard in the podcast about anthrax that like there was a pattern of sorts, envelopes being sent through the mail. In the Unabomber case, there were bombs that were sent in packages, right? This was like in one bombing, there was a bomb on a mousetrap that was triggered. Another bombing, the bomb was like opening the package. Another bombing, there was a tripwire in the street. It is, I think, scarier when it's a bomber that's attacking in so many random ways in places that seem like different MOs.
Well, what that shows is that the bomber, with each device getting more sophisticated, it's showing that the bomber is sort of like testing his abilities. Like, can I do the next one? Can I do the next one? Because they're right. Like a tripwire bomb is very different than, this one where, snap the mousetrap. Because I think in the first one, the witness said that the victim actually like shouted out like, oh shit, or something like, so there was enough time for the victim to comprehend what was about to happen.
We knew when this happened, the victim's daughter was inside, and one of her statements is that she heard her dad say, oh shit, right before the detonation.
Part of me thinks, we talk about motivation and why things were done and it was targeted. I think some of the reason that the bombs kept coming was because the guy felt like he could do more and better each time. And that gets tied in with, the selection of the targets and maybe why some of that happened. But I think that part of it, that he was getting off on the ability to make more sophisticated explosive devices.
There was also this conversation in the podcast, too, about the bomber was probably watching the coverage and responding to the coverage. And Laura...
Are you a profiler now?
No, this was in the podcast.
I know. Well, I'm just... Yeah.
And Laura, there was this conversation about, as, a TV station, which we heard from this guy who's a TV reporter, like, how do you do the coverage when you know the bomber is responding to your coverage and possibly changing his MO? I'm comfortable saying his because we know who the bomber is ultimately at the end and it's news, but his MO based on your coverage. Like when they talked about it potentially being racially motivated attacks, all of a sudden there's an attack in a white neighborhood. When we talk about the MO, all of a sudden it's a different MO. So like, what do you think about that? Because there is a whole thing where like you want the public to be informed so they can make informed choices, but then you're also giving the bomber... It's like I understand the conundrum, but I'm also a journalist, so I'm like, And
having worked as a journalist, that's the whole thing is like the police are like, you can't put this information out because this is going to jeopardize our investigation. But in this case where you have information that's out there, like who the victims are, what's happening, you also have your duty to report. And you're not necessarily an arm of law enforcement, but at the same time, this is a situation where people are getting blown up. So it's like there is sort of that ethical, like journalistic standards along with human standards, right? Like humanity and how what you're doing is going to play into what's happening next. But that was the thing is like, it's so unclear because the motive keeps changing. And so they're like, is it a hate crime? Is it targeted? It's not like when we see somebody that's bombing and it's like they're using like the exact same type of bomb every time. And they're like, oh, we know this was made by X, Y, and Z because this is their patented trademark design or whatever. We go from the tripwire bomb. Yeah, patented. That's
like they went to the patent office and said, this is my bomb.
Yes.
And you cannot copyright infringement.
Haven't you guys watched shows like that where they're like, oh yeah, we know that this person's MO is that they do this with the bomb or whatever.
Yeah, but they don't take a patent out on their bomb, right?
No, not typically.
No, okay.
Not typically.
Get royalties if some other terrorist uses it.
Yeah. The Bricker Bomb TM, it's like...
Or they may have learned it from a specific book or training, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I think what you take away from that is like, the journalists are in this position. This person keeps changing the way they're bombing, and it becomes clear that they don't really care who they're hurting or who they're targeting. They just want to hurt somebody for some reason, right? It just seems to sort of be like equal opportunity at that point, right?
Yeah.
Or they're just trying to create terror, right?
Right.
I think that's effective is when there doesn't seem to be any pattern. There doesn't seem to be like any consistency in how you're doing it. It suddenly just opens up this range of possibilities where nobody knows if they're safe. Nobody's really sure what to look for. Like I didn't want to open packages, but now apparently I can't walk along the sidewalk that to me seems like a pretty effective way of just keeping everybody on edge in a way that I'm just going to send a bunch of mail bombs to people in this one neighborhood doesn't do.
Yeah. Our jokes will never bomb on Patreon.
Oh.
They're always going to land.
All right, Kevin.
If you join us.
Incorrect.
The exit surveys say otherwise.
If you go to patreon.com/partners in crime media, you can get up to 15 exclusive podcasts every month, depending on the level that you support us at. But if you join us at the leading off level, you get great podcasts like the Crime Writers on After Show.
Yay!
On this week's After Show, Rebecca's going to tell us all about her trip to Yellowstone. Did you meet Kevin Costner?
Hell no. And if I saw him coming, I would have turned the other way. Sorry, Laura.
You know why he talks like this?
Because he thinks it's cool.
Yeah, it's not because something has changed with Kevin Costner. It's like he didn't have thyroid cancer like I did. He just thought this sounds better. Anyway, that's all we're going to talk about. Other great things on Patreon include Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcast. The new podcast coming out covers the book Among the Bros. Toby, you just did that recording. Tell us about how the discussion went.
It was good. I mean, I think nobody actually super liked it. People had different issues with it. I think we kind of identified things that were good about it, things that were bad about it, sort of opportunities that might have been there. I was just really interested that of all the books that we've done on the deep dive, this seemed to have the most pushback that I saw. People just I couldn't read this. I sat this one out. And I was like, we've done books about serial killers and Mexican journalists getting killed by cartels and stuff. And some frat bros dealing Xanax is that's the line that people don't want to go, which I get. I mean, it's annoying as hell. But anyway, so yeah, it was a fun discussion. I think people like it.
You also can get something like Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker podcast, in which she solves mysteries in her quaint AF hometown of Exeter, New Hampshire. We also have Married with Podcast, the podcast in which Rebecca and I dole out relationship advice. In the latest episode, we have a listener who wants to know how she can support her husband who is hurt after taking a stand against his parents.
We heartily disagreed on that answer.
We can also get great things like our Crime Writers On newsletter. If you just go to crimewriterson.com, every Thursday we'll drop you a free newsletter where you can get things like recaps of the shows. You can see Crime of the Week, Pet of the Week, Post of the Week, Crime Writers On merch, CWO, behind the scenes, all sorts of great stuff. And also you can check out some of our great shopping advice we can get at the Amazon store, our Crime Writers On Amazon store. You go to amazon.com/shop/Crime Writers On. See all of our recommendations there.
Kevin.
Yeah.
Is that the end of the business section?
Did I stop talking?
Yeah.
Then that's the signal, babe.
All right.
This business section is done and dusted.
I'm going to go ahead and fade that music out right now.
Maytag month has got it going on. It's all you want with the savings all month long. Baby, can't you see? Maytag month is all you need. You know you can't go wrong when Maytag month is going on.
Save on award-winning performance on all Maytag major appliances during May is Maytag month, happening now through May 31st.
Shop incredible savings on Maytag at NFM.
Maytag month is going on.
So, Kevin, who is our next sponsor on this program?
We're sponsored by Quince.
Oh, Quince, yay! I just ordered something from Quince.
Yeah, okay, so the weather's getting warmer, and we're putting away all those winter sweaters and the big jackets, and you know what you find out?
You need stuff.
You don't have anything really great for the warmer weather. So this is a great time to look into the great deals they have at Quince. They have premium European linen dresses, blouses, shorts from $30, washable silk tops, 14-karat gold jewelry, so much more. All Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands.
Yep, I just ordered something from Quince. Literally, just did.
What did you get?
I have this cardigan that I have there in this light blue color. It's this cotton and linen boyfriend fit cardigan that I got last summer that I love so much. I just ordered a second one in camel because I wear it all the time. I love it so much, and I ordered a new one. I love it.
Okay, so I guess that's a personal endorsement?
It is. I love Quince. I love it so much.
Get warm, weather ready with Quince. Go to quince.com/crime for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE Shopify.com/crime to get free shipping and 365-day returns. QUINCE.com/crime.
All right, so Kevin, who is our next sponsor on the show?
We're sponsored by Shopify.
Ooh.
Okay, so you got to name some sleuthing partners who got it done. Watson and Holmes, the Hardy Boys, Cagney and Lacey.
Oh.
Rizzoli and Isles.
Wait a minute, how old was the person that wrote this copy? They put down Cagney and Lacey.
They put down
I
the
love
Hardy
Cagney and
Boys.
Lacey.
What?
I use Cagney and Lacey all the time when I refer to my colleague and my PI colleague. I'm like, we're like Cagney and Lacey.
Oh, man.
My God, this is like, you had no electricity in the 80s, but you knew Cagney and Lacey on CBS.
Yes. I don't know how it happened.
Toby doesn't even know who Cagney and Lacey are. I guarantee
And
it.
I do.
Isn't it like Tyne Daly?
Oh, wow, snap.
Wow.
It's like Scott and Bailey. It's like Scott and Bailey are like the British version of Cagney and Lacey.
Okay, Rizzoli and Isles. I was going to go Mulder and Scully myself.
Huh. Wow.
Starsky and Hutch.
Oh, okay. There you go. Chico and the Man.
Huh.
They weren't detectives, right?
They not usually.
Do heart-to-heart count?
Yeah, because when they met,
Heart-to-heart.
it was murder. But what about perfect partners when it comes to growing your business? That's you and Shopify. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business, from the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to your, did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Shopify is there for you. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout and sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic, your AI-powered all-star.
Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/crimewriters.
Crime Writers,
all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/crimewriters.
Crime Writers.
All lowercase now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/crimewriters. All right, so one of the things that I kept thinking about, Toby, is I really wish that our reporter, Mr. Flynn, no relation to Kevin, would have interjected at one point with a definition of what terrorism actually meant. Because we did hear some law enforcement official at one point, and we sort of kept hearing these moving targets. He was like, if it had looked like this, then we would have known it was terrorism, because that's what we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm like, this is like, there's a discussion around the word terrorism, right? Is that like, there's a very often hesitation to call acts by white supremacist groups terrorism, but as soon as it's environmentalists doing it or brown people doing it, it's terrorism. So that's just sort of a conversation that I feel like needs to be had, especially if there's a journalist present. I don't know. What do you think about law enforcement's shifting definitions of the word terrorism?
I mean, I've probably talked about this before, but I agree with you that it ends up describing more ideology and ethnic background, I think, than like what the actual outcome is or the event. Quite honestly, there's nothing about this podcast that made me think that was the kind of thing that it would look into. It seems to sort of curiously not address some of the big issues, at least in what we've heard so far. It's really just this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. It's an interesting story. They get a couple of people who come in and talk about sort of secondhand personal experiences with things. But there isn't, other than some stats and like that kind of journalism, there isn't any kind of opining about some of the issues that are brought up by the story, which, it is what it is, right? If that's not their ambition, it's not their ambition. But by not kind of examining that, you're kind of asking the audience to kind of fall into the same kind of thinking, which to my mind isn't great.
Right.
But the ambitions for this podcast seem fairly modest.
Right.
I mean, it seems like we're going to tell this story and then that's roughly it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, when people sometimes think terrorism, they think it has to have a political motivation behind it or something like that.
That's kind of what they said in the podcast.
Well, yeah, but I think in sort of its basic terms, that anything that terrorizes is terrorism. And domestic, you might want to try to define it, because if you can define it, it might give some answers as to whether the motive or to the identity of the bomber. There was definitely the indication early on, because the early targets were in black neighborhoods, that maybe this is a hate crime. And in the end, I don't know if we kind of get that that's exactly what it is, but I do understand why law enforcement may be reluctant to say that in that moment. You don't want to say, we believe that this perpetrator, is targeting certain ethnicity, when later when they arrest them, they find out it's a personal cause where they're targeting, because then a defense attorney says, well, didn't you say blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't mean that they're wrong about that. So I think in this case, in the end, right? I mean, it's kind of hard because he died, right?
Also conveniently, because law enforcement will never release his manifesto.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then that's an important thing if the public wants to understand the motivations and, but again, if it's just nihilistic or it's conspiracy theories or it's some other defined political philosophy, I mean, I think it's still terrorism, domestic terrorism either way.
Yeah. I mean, all terrorism is terrorism. I mean, this guy, he died, but he was recording a manifesto in his car before he died. Mm-hmm. It was 25 minutes long. Law enforcement has never released it or a transcript of it, but we have people on the podcast saying they heard it and saying that it's just very clear he did it and acted alone, and that the one quote we get from it is, I wish I was sorry, but I'm not, and that he's clearly just a cold, calculated, serial killer type. But they don't say it wasn't racially motivated, which stuck out to me. You know what I mean? That's definitely something that I think they could have refuted, that they don't necessarily refute. I do want to.
But the targets were selected that way, that it was. That's a combination of both. That it wasn't racial animus that caused them to do the bombs, but it was his racial animus that caused him to pick those targets when he could have picked something else.
They kind of don't land on that either way. And there's a UT professor who sort of gives a very passing nod to the racial component of the story at the end. But again, it's just very brief. Again, it doesn't really dig, sort of like the Anthrax podcast did dig into sort of the side issues. I want to talk about how this crime was solved. I mean, Laura, you have some insight into that, and the investigators asking a question at the end of the interview and getting the key clue that solved this whole thing.
So the guys ask him, hey, is there anything else you want to tell us? Is there anything we haven't asked? And he goes, well, you want me to tell you about his car? And it was kind of what? What did he just say?
Yeah, I love that, where the investigator was always at the end of the interview, I always ask, is there anything else you want to tell me that I haven't asked you about? And I was like, yes, I always do that. And you never know. You could get nothing. You could get something totally random. Or in this case, you could get the detail about the red truck, which then they start cross-referencing, and then they figure out that basically able to trace where this guy is coming from. So that was really interesting. And then going through the, pictures at the Dropbox at FedEx and see, okay, here's the guy. He's dressed like Wayne's World with his fake blonde wig. I don't know if anyone looked at the picture, but he definitely looked like a character from Wayne's World when he was going in disguise to mail his packages. But then what I thought kind of in solving it was once they knew who it was and they're closing in on this guy, I liked that they added the perspective of that roommate that was living with him. Because it wasn't we're watching Dateline and they have the same generic thing to say about everybody when you're well, what were they like? Oh, I knew they were super weird, right? He actually had some good details about when he had a very firm handshake. I'm whoa, that right
was
there.
Was that illuminating though?
He was kind of quiet. I met people who were more quiet than he was. Mark wasn't the type of guy you couldn't have a conversation with. You could talk to him about stuff you're interested in. We had food in the pantry. I shared that. He's like, hey, do you want this? I have popcorn. I'm not going to eat it. You can have it. He's like, oh, yeah, cool. All right. He also had a very firm handshake.
He's laughing and cursing at night. I'm ooh, also mysterious.
Really?
No.
He's playing Xbox. Everyone laughs and curses when they play Xbox.
But then it was, they were talking about playing Xbox and how he would break the controllers when he loses the games, and he was pretty immature. And then obviously you see, okay, something must have happened when he lost his job because now he's sleeping on the couch. But I thought that guy was kind of just a very measured, interesting voice after listening to basically police investigators and bomb squad people for the whole rest of this podcast.
Well, the whole purpose of the roommate ultimately is that he briefly becomes a potential suspect. Did he or didn't he know, along with the other roommate, quote, Alan, who we never meet. Toby, what did you think about the inclusion of the roommate in this story?
I thought it was hilarious. I mean, his story isn't hilarious. His story is very sad. But the part where he's talking about the perpetrator, it seemed to me it'd be the way that I would talk about some guy who lived on my dorm hall who I wasn't friends with. You run into him occasionally, so you know a little bit about him. It's oh yeah, he's really into Supertramp, or he whatever. You need to know these little facts about him, but you don't really know him. So he would be saying stuff well, he was kind of cold, but he was super generous. And he's like saying these contradictory things. And at one point, I think he was talking about how like his computer wasn't working and the guy like helped him out with it. And that doesn't seem like the kind of guy who'd be killing people with bombs. I was like, what is going on here? Like you live under the same roof. You don't know him. Like, because you live under the same roof, you have a few facts about him that you can kind of throw out there. But like, I didn't come away with that thinking like, oh, okay, well, I guess I got this guy's deal. No, I was like, no, like they didn't hang out. Like when they did hang out, they were playing video games and not like chatting.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just thought the whole thing, like, I actually thought what was more revealing was the story that he told about his own life and how he ended up at this house.
Yep.
That seemed interesting to me. That seemed to kind of put the perpetrator's sort of living situation, social situation into some kind of context. Because you see this kid who's clearly kind of adrift and struggling ends up in this guy's house. And,
right.
And I thought that was interesting. And then the other parts, I was just like, okay, man, like you're making the best out of this, but you do not know this guy at all.
Right. It's like the bomber's house for wayward boys is sort of what the situation
exactly.
was. And the thing that I found was like funny, like in the same kind of way, is that later when you find out your roommate is in fact a terrorist bomber, you ascribe great meaning to things that were not meaningful. Like, when they're talking about the bombings and, the roommate says to him, well, I'm not going to scare it. He's going to let me win. And it's realized I said that to the guy who was doing the crime. And it's like, yeah, that's what you would have said to literally anybody with whom you were talking about the bombing.
Right. Well, and I don't want to get into it all, but I actually did live in a house with a guy who was investigated for being a terrorist.
Oh my!
In like the 90s. I don't know how that all ended up. We kind of found out like right as we were leaving. But yeah, I mean, you have the guy was from Uzbekistan, I think. So it wasn't like normal conversations because a lot of it was like trying to translate cultural stuff. But yeah, like you just have normal interactions with people. And then looking back in hindsight, you're like, ugh.
It's just like my McGruff story.
That could have gone differently.
It's just like your McGruff story. Yes, Kevin. So Kevin, there was some good tape in this podcast that did have some emotional resonance.
I think there were two incredible pieces of tape. One was the one that comes from that relative of one of the bombing victims. I think he's a teacher. And
I believe his name is Zeke.
He had to drive himself to Texas, and he's sort of like, he's like verbalizing and recording his feelings about it. It's a standout moment. I don't think it's enough to carry the series. If more of these kinds of things existed, it would really elevate the season for me. I just don't think that exists. And the second incredible piece of tape, and I don't ever like talking about it, and I swear I would never talk about it, but I have to talk about it, is the ad that the host did for Simply Safe. And I can see Toby already shaking his head, where instead of talking about the great points of keeping people out of the house, that he's using it to make sure his kid doesn't sneak out.
What? I did not get this ad. How did it go?
You didn't pick that up?
I got that
You didn't
ad.
get that?
I didn't get it. Oh, you know why? Because I listened on the binge. So I didn't hear any ads at all. Tell me about the ad. Can we hear it? Did it drop the tape?
I've got pretty good kids, but a couple years ago, one of them started trying to sneak out late at night. But he never got away with it. You know why? Because we have Simply Safe home security. As soon as he cracked a window, we knew.
So it was kind of what we call an off-label
Oh my gosh.
I thought that was incredible. So,
that's a way to do
weird
it.
Ads, we can't throw the first stone.
Oh, we
but
can't throw the first stone.
That was a different way of pushing that product.
To be fair, Kevin, you do use our home security camera to make sure that one of our kids has actually walked the dog when he said he would.
But not keep the dog in the house.
That's actually what all parents use those things for.
Yeah, exactly.
Making sure kids do their chores.
I used to have a ladder out my window in high school. I used to climb out all the time.
I had a low porch roof, man. That's what those things were for.
But you didn't have electricity. You didn't, let alone a video camera.
Thank goodness we didn't have Simply Safe in the 90s.
It was great. Thank God they didn't, because this allowed me to climb out the ladder and go out in the middle of the night and do God knows what.
Certified Transmission built its reputation on the job done right. It means hard work, honesty, and integrity.
And quality service that makes customers feel confident and secure in their vehicles.
At Certified Transmission, our expertly trained technicians diagnose, service, and repair transmissions.
And together, we ensure our customers leave satisfied and worry-free.
Certified Transmission, the job done right at the right price.
Find a location near you at certifiedtransmission.com.
Looking for a new show to dive into? Well, go to Hulu and see what's new, because Hulu has new stuff all the time. Like the full season of FX's epic limited series Shogun, FX's new international spy thriller The Veil, starring Emmy and Golden Globe winner Elizabeth Moss. And don't miss the all-new crime series Under the Bridge, inspired by shocking true events and starring Riley Keough and Lily Gladstone. It's all new, and it's streaming now on Hulu.
On this episode of Plant Killers, we'll explore one nation's most notorious fruit and vegetable killer, bad dirt. What makes bad dirt so bad? The answer? The ingredients. But fear not, true crime enthusiasts. This story has a happy ending. New Miracle Grow organic raised bed and garden soil. It's made with quality organic ingredients from upcycled green waste like compost and aged bark. Unlike the other guys who can't say the same. Looks like bad dirt's murdering days are over, thanks to Miracle Grow. Join us next time on Plant Killers.
Okay, let's do what we do. Let's let our listeners know, should they check out Witnessed 19 Days? Laura Bricker, what do you think? Thumbs up or thumbs down for this podcast?
I'm going to go mild thumbs up with this because I didn't love this. I didn't hate this. There's like nothing really wrong with this podcast, but it wasn't like I finished it and was like, wow, this is the greatest podcast I've ever listened to. This was a very well done in terms of just being like a straightforward crime, police, procedural style of podcast and storytelling with all of the proper investigators and the journalists that were there, told like chronologically as it's unfolding, but with not a lot of creativity. So I was kind of like, I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. But if you want to learn about this case, this is a way that you could do it. So I will go mild thumbs up.
Toby Ball, thumbs up or thumbs down for Witnessed 19 Days?
Yeah, I mean, I think my reaction is basically the same as Laura's, which is it's obviously, it's very competently done. I think there are smart people working on this. I don't know why they didn't want to do a little bit more with it. It's not even so much that it's bare bones, but it's just the scope is so narrow. Like we always talk about zooming out and zooming in and all this stuff. It doesn't zoom anywhere, right? It's just like, it's got that same like focus the whole time. But on the other hand, the writing's good for what it is. It's really well sourced. It's not hard to follow. They do all the signposting and stuff really well. You're never confused about where you are. I mean, it's good storytelling. So I'm sort of a mild thumbs up. It just kind of feels like it should have been more than it was. But for what it is, it does a fine job.
Kevin Flynn.
I guess I'm going to have to go sideways on this one. As far as true crime storytelling here, I mean, it's pretty rudimentary. It's let's follow the cops, let's get their story. And that way it's very much like a classic true crime book, kind of like the kind that we wrote. And so I can't fault it for that, but it doesn't really sing, despite the fact it's got a lot of built-in tension. I mean, I don't know how many times I need to hear like how somebody got a telephone call and what the reaction was.
I was just getting into bed when.
Yeah, and I couldn't believe it. Okay, great. That's cool. But it doesn't really do anything poorly. I kind of like the host, Flynn to Flynn. He sounds like Gilbert King. Right? Does anybody else kind of pick up on that? Yeah, the Witnessed series here from Sony and Campside, like it's kind of a catch-all. I'm looking at the different seasons. We had Mystic Mother, and then Devil in the Ditch.
So good.
And then Fade to Black, and then this, like they're just like tonally, they're just very different, as opposed to maybe Chameleon. So I don't know. That's just another observation. Like I said, it's not bad. I think if you're just looking for a straightforward story about an investigation, because I did like, all the details about how they did the investigation and sort of certainly the competence of all these law enforcement professionals that are trying to answer this unanswerable question. But for me, it's kind of mid, so I'm going sideways.
I'm going, this is tough. I'm going sideways too. I was going to go mild thumbs up because, we were only like technically, because when our review's coming out, like we only needed to listen to like 6 or 7 or whatever. And I did want to listen to 8. So I'm like, okay, that pushes it up. And I also really like the music in this podcast. It reminded me of Hunting Warhead, the soundscape. But it didn't ask any questions at moments where I was like, I have a question about that. I need you to dig into that a little more, or I need you to turn to camera and tell me, or at least interrogate what that person just said, because that's not right, or that's not cool, or, at least say, hey, other people say this. And I just feel like the journalism here was strong enough that it was missing that layer. And we just listened to the show about the anthrax attacks, which was essentially like a similar story structure, of course, over a longer period of time, like a procedural where they were trying to catch a guy doing a thing. And that was just so much stronger than this in terms of the way it was laid out, and very similar thriller kind of story that just dug into the issues around an investigation in such a smart way. And that kind of material was here and we didn't get any of it. And for me, that glaring absence is what throws this sideways for me. All right, now it's time for my favorite part of the podcast, a little something I like to call the Crime of the Week. It's called the Crime of the Week. A 4-year-old toddler kept telling her parents there were monsters living inside her bedroom closet. She was wrong. Instead, there were 50,000 bees living there. The family thought their daughter had been watching too much Monsters, Inc. and was imagining things. They still didn't believe her when she started having night terrors. But the family did call a pest control expert when they noticed honeybees coming from the attic of their 100-year-old North Carolina farmhouse. The technician followed the bees down the floorboards to the wall of the child's bedroom below. With his thermal camera, he spotted what might have been a floor-to-ceiling hive. So he did what anyone would do. Put a hammer through the plaster wall to have a closer look. Instantly, a black swarm of thousands of bees came pouring out of the hole, and a massive amount of honey dripped down the pink wall, so it looked just like blood. In addition to the 50,000 bees living there, the beekeeper removed a 100-pound honeycomb. The process of removing the hive will take several days. The honey caused $20,000 in damage to the electrical wiring that their insurance is now refusing to cover. The keeper located the queen and transferred her to a bee sanctuary. And while many living in the hive will follow her, many more won't and will die. So in addition to cleaning the sticky walls and floors and waiting to see if any workers return, the family will also be cleaning up thousands of dead bees in the coming days. So, panel, what other horrors?
That child is going to just grow up knowing that no one's going to believe anything she ever says.
Yes, and Laura Bricker, what other horrors will this child discover in her home that no one will believe are there?
I got to get away from this horror theme, so I'm going to go what you might find in the wall at my house. Anybody like hide that Christmas present that they buy early and then they find it like 3 years later?
Yes.
And you're like, oh, shit. This doesn't fit anymore. I would like this child to find something nice in their wall. So that's my vote.
You hide your Christmas presents in your walls?
Well, like, don't you hide them something? Like, I've hidden things all over the place. Like in the attic behind the bed. Like, you know, that's technically the walls, I guess.
Like all your paper money?
Yes.
Yeah.
Toby Ball, what other horrors will this child discover in her home?
Talking pig with glowing eyes, gateway to hell in the basement. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities.
What do you think, Kevin?
The 50,000 spiders under her bed.
Oh, God. Or that clown doll that reaches out with the strangle arms, like in Poltergeist.
I just want to say, I stole mine from Wait, Don't Tell Me. So thank you, Peter Sagal. I thought that was a good line.
Oh, my goodness. All right. Laura Bricker, if folks want to reach out to you and ask you where else presents might be hiding in your home, how can they find you online?
They can find me at Laura Bricker on Twitter and Instagram.
Toby Ball, folks want to reach out to you and hear more about your buddies who lived in your dorm in college, how can they find you online?
At Toby Ball NH.
Kevin Flynn, where can you be found?
I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
And if you want to follow me everywhere, you can find me at Reb Lavoie. Follow the show everywhere at Crime Writers On, and I encourage you to join our incredible Facebook group. It's really, really fun there. Just go to regular Facebook, find us, hit join the group. We'll let you in if you know any one of our names. Get episodes early and ad-free at patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media. You'll also get the Crime Writers On After Show, Married with Podcast, Laura Bricker's Leave It to Bricker, and Toby Ball's Deep Dive Book Club podcasts. Our theme song was composed and performed by Ty Gibbons. Our line editor is the terrific Livy Burdett. The executive producer of the show is Kevin Flynn. This show was recorded in the Treehouse Yoga Studio above the Mockingbird Cafe in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi studio, otherwise known as Studio C, The Closet, in our New Hampshire basement, where we also make sure our kids are not sneaking out after curfew.
Got you, motherfucker!
On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you later.
My kids are pretty great, but one of them started sneaking out of the house, and fortunately we had Simply Safe, so...
partners in crime media.
On this episode of Plant Killers, we'll explore one nation's most notorious fruit and vegetable killer, bad dirt. What makes bad dirt so bad? The answer? The ingredients. But fear not, true crime enthusiasts. This story has a happy ending. New Miracle Grow organic raised bed and garden soil. It's made with quality organic ingredients from upcycled green waste like compost and aged bark. Unlike the other guys who can't say the same. Looks like bad dirt's murdering days are over, thanks to Miracle Grow. Join us next time on Plant Killers.